The ancient facility floated in the darkness between stars, silent and forgotten. Ambassador Kelrix pressed his hand against the viewing port, watching as his team carefully cut through the outer door. The metal was unlike anything he had seen in his 40 years of service to the Concordat. It didn't corrode. It didn't age. It simply existed, as perfect as the day it was made thousands of years ago. "We're through, Ambassador," his chief engineer called over the radio. The Therian's voice carried a hint of excitement that even her professional training couldn't hide. Kelrix pushed himself through the zero-gravity corridor, his blue skin gleaming under the work lights. The facility had no power, no life support, no signs that anyone had been here since the architects vanished from the galaxy 3 millennia ago. Yet the structure remained, orbiting a strange shimmering barrier that enclosed an entire star system. The Sol system, the Forbidden Zone, the place no ship had entered for 3,000 years. Inside the facility, Kelrix's team had already begun scanning the walls. Symbols covered every surface, written in the architect's complex language that scholars had spent centuries learning to decode. His translator, a young Velen named Prisha, moved her scanner across the characters with quick practice movements. "Ambassador, you need to see this," Prisha said. Her fur stood on end, a sign of distress in her species. "These aren't maintenance logs or navigation data. These are warnings." Kelrix floated closer, reading the translated text on her display. His hearts both skipped a beat. The words described a species called humans. They lived on the third planet of the Sol system, a world they named Earth. According to the records, humans were dangerous. Not because they were strong or technologically advanced, but because they were unpredictable. They felt emotions more intensely than any other known species. They formed bonds that made them willing to die for each other. They created beautiful art and terrible weapons with equal passion. They could love and hate with a force that frightened the architects. "They didn't destroy this species?" Kelrix asked, reading further. "No," Prisha replied. "The architects debated it. Some wanted to eliminate the humans before they could threaten the galaxy. Others argued that humanity had potential, that their intensity could be channeled into something remarkable if given time. They compromised. They built the barrier. They sealed Earth away from the rest of the galaxy, hoping that in isolation humans would either evolve beyond their violent nature or destroy themselves." Kelrix continued reading. The records showed that humans had been a young species when the barrier went up. They had just begun reaching into space, sending primitive rockets to their own moon. They had nations that fought each other constantly. They polluted their own world. They created weapons capable of ending all life on their planet. The architects watched them for 50 years and decided the risk was too great. So they built a barrier using technology beyond anything the current Concordat could imagine. A wall of folded space that surrounded the entire Sol system. Nothing could get in. Nothing could get out. Not light, not radio waves, not ships. The humans were cut off completely, left alone with themselves for 3,000 years. "What do you think happened to them?" asked Torvin, the security chief. The massive Kravor warrior had to duck through every doorway, his scaled hide scraping against the ancient metal. "They're probably extinct," Prisha said softly. 3,000 years is a long time. If they were as violent as these records suggest, they likely destroyed themselves within the first few centuries. Kelrix wasn't so sure. He had studied many species in his career. Violence alone rarely destroyed a civilization. It was violence without wisdom, without adaptation, without the ability to learn from mistakes. But humans, according to these records, were remarkably adaptable. They learned quickly. They changed their behavior based on experience. "Ambassador," called out the engineer, "you need to see this. The barrier is failing." Kelrix pushed off toward the central chamber where his engineer had accessed the facility's core systems. Even without main power, backup crystals still held data. On the holographic display, the engineer showed him energy readings from the barrier. "It's been degrading for the last 200 years, she explained, slowly, almost imperceptibly. "But the decay is accelerating. Based on these projections, the barrier will completely collapse within 6 months. The news hit Kelrix like a physical blow. 6 months. In 6 months, whatever remained in the Sol system would be free to leave. Whether that meant ruins of a dead civilization or something else entirely, no one knew. He had to report this to the Concordat Council immediately. The council chamber on the Concordat capital world of Axiom Prime was designed to inspire awe. Representatives from 7 major species sat in a circular arrangement, each in an environment suit tailored to their needs. The chamber could accommodate methane breathers, high-gravity species, and delicate beings that required precise temperature control all at the same time. Kelrick stood in the center, presenting his findings. The holographic display showed the ancient facility, the architect warnings, and the deteriorating barrier. As he spoke, he watched the council members' reactions. Some showed curiosity. Others showed fear. "We must send a military fleet," demanded Warlord Krathix of the Cravor. "The architects sealed these humans for a reason. If they survived, they are a threat. We should be prepared to neutralize that threat." "We should send scientists," countered Dr. Yenna of the peaceful Yenna species. 3,000 years of isolation means we could learn so much about evolutionary development in closed systems. This is a unique opportunity. The debate raged for hours. Kelrix listened to every argument, adding his thoughts when asked. The truth was, no one knew what they would find. The humans might be gone, leaving only ruins and records. They might have regressed to a primitive state, hunting with stone tools on a dying world. They might have stagnated, trapped at the same technological level they had been when the barrier was erected. Or they might have advanced. They might have had 3,000 years to think about their violent nature, to evolve, to change. 3,000 years was a long time for a species that learned quickly. Finally, High Chancellor Morix called for a vote. The decision was made. The Concordat would send a combined fleet, warships for protection, science vessels for study, and diplomatic ships in case something could still communicate. They would observe from outside the barrier as it fell. They would be ready for anything, but as Kelrix left the chamber, he couldn't shake a feeling in both his hearts. The architects had been the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever known. They could have destroyed humanity easily. Instead, they built a prison that would only last 3,000 years. Long enough for a young species to grow up. Long enough for humanity to face itself without outside influence. What if the architects hadn't been afraid of what humanity was, but excited about what they could become? In 6 months, the galaxy would have its answer. The barrier would fall and Earth's long silence would finally end. Kelrix found himself hoping that when humans returned to the stars, they would surprise everyone. Not with violence, but with what they had learned in the darkness, alone with themselves and their choices. The countdown had begun. The barrier fell on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time, though the Concordat fleet watching from a safe distance had no way of knowing that. One moment the shimmering wall of folded space surrounded the Sol system like a soap bubble. The next moment it simply wasn't there anymore. 3,000 years of imprisonment ended without ceremony or sound. Admiral Vexith ordered the scout ships forward. Small, fast vessels darted into the system, their sensors scanning for any signs of life or technology. The main fleet held position, weapons powered but not armed. They expected ruins. They prepared for primitives. They hoped for something interesting. What they found made every species in the fleet question their understanding of isolation and survival. "Admiral, you're seeing this, right?" the scout captain asked, her voice tight with disbelief. The sensor data appeared on Vexith's display. The third planet, Earth, glowed with lights on its night side. Not scattered fires from primitive settlements. City lights, millions of them, covering the continents in glowing webs. Orbital platforms ringed the planet, dozens of them connected by transport ships that moved in organized patterns. But that was just the beginning. The fourth planet, Mars, showed signs of terraforming. Atmosphere processors worked across its surface. Domed cities dotted the rust-colored landscape. The asteroid belt had been transformed into an industrial zone, with mining operations and manufacturing facilities carved into the larger rocks. Stations orbited every major planet and moon. Jupiter's moons held research bases. Saturn's rings contained harvesting operations. Humanity hadn't just survived. They had conquered their entire star system. "Movement," the tactical officer announced. Multiple ships approaching from Earth orbit, showing weapons, fusion drives, kinetic cannons, missile banks. The human ships looked crude compared to Concordat vessels. They were angular and mechanical, built for function rather than elegance. Their engines burned bright and hot instead of the cool efficiency of antimatter drives. But there were a lot of them, and they moved with clear purpose and coordination. "They're forming a defensive perimeter," Admiral Vexith observed. They know we're here. They've been ready. A communication request came through. The signal was in multiple frequencies, clearly trying to establish contact. The Concordate's computers worked to decode it, and within minutes translation protocols engaged. A human face appeared on the screen. She was lean and sharp-eyed, with skin the color of rich earth and hair pulled back in a tight knot. She wore a uniform of dark blue with insignia that suggested military rank. Behind her, a bridge crew worked at various stations, all moving with practiced efficiency. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Starship Endurance," she said. Her voice was calm but carried an edge of controlled intensity. "You have entered sovereign human space. Identify yourselves and state your intentions." Admiral Vexith felt a chill run through his carapace. This wasn't how first contact usually went. Primitive species were supposed to be awed or frightened. This human spoke like an equal, even though her ship was clearly outmatched by any single vessel in his fleet. "I am Admiral Vexith of the Concordate Fleet," he replied carefully. "We mean no harm. We are here because the barrier that surrounded your system has fallen. We wish to establish peaceful communication." Captain Chen's expression didn't change. The barrier didn't fall. It expired. "We've been monitoring its decay for 200 years. We knew you'd come." That answer created a stir on the Concordate command deck. They had been monitoring? These humans with their primitive technology had been studying architect tech? "We would like to arrange a meeting," Vexith continued. "There is much to discuss." "Agreed," Chen replied. "But not here. We'll meet on neutral ground, Luna Base, our moon. You can bring a delegation of 20. Weapons are permitted for security, but any hostile action will be met with immediate response. We'll send coordinates." The transmission ended before Vexith could respond. He looked at his officers, seeing his own surprise reflected in their faces. This was not what anyone had expected. Ambassador Kelrix led the diplomatic team to Luna Base 3 days later. The base sat in a large crater, protected by energy shields and defensive turrets. As their shuttle descended, Kelrix studied the construction. The humans built things to last with redundant systems and practical design. Everything served a purpose. Inside, the base was clean and well lit. Humans in various uniforms moved through corridors with efficient purpose. Some stopped to stare at the alien visitors, but none showed fear. Curiosity, yes. Wariness, certainly. But not fear. Captain Chen met them in a large conference room. She had brought a team of her own, scientists, military officers, and diplomats. The humans were diverse, Kelrix noticed. Different skin colors, different features, different body types. But they all shared that same intense focus, that alertness that suggested they were always thinking several steps ahead. "Welcome to Luna," Chen said, gesturing to seats that had been designed to accommodate different species. "Let's begin with the obvious question. Why were we imprisoned?" The bluntness surprised Kelrix, but he appreciated it. He had brought data crystals with copies of the architect records. For the next hour, he explained what they had found. The architect's concerns about human violence and unpredictability, the debate about whether to destroy or isolate, the decision to build the barrier and let time decide humanity's fate. The humans listened in silence. Some faces showed anger, others showed sadness. A few showed understanding. When Kelrix finished, Captain Chen leaned back in her chair. "We figured it was something like that," she said quietly. "About 500 years ago, we found remnants of architect technology on Mars. Enough to understand we weren't alone in the universe. Enough to know we'd been judged and found wanting." "What did you do with that knowledge?" Kelrix asked. Chen's expression hardened. "We looked at ourselves. Really looked. At our history, our wars. Our tendency to destroy what we should protect. The architects weren't wrong about us, Ambassador. We were violent. We were unstable. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times in the first 1,000 years of isolation." She stood and walked to a window overlooking the lunar surface. Earth hung in the black sky, blue and green and beautiful. But we didn't destroy ourselves. Every time we came close, enough people chose differently. We learned. We changed. We unified not because we had to, but because we wanted to. We turned our aggression toward problems instead of each other. We channeled our intensity into building instead of destroying. One of her officers, a man with gray hair and dark skin, spoke up. "We studied the barrier constantly. We knew it was degrading. We knew eventually you'd come. So we prepared. We built ships. We trained soldiers. We developed technology without templates to copy, without trade partners to learn from. Everything you see we made ourselves. Another human, a woman with red hair and freckles, added, "We also prepared culturally. We studied every scrap of information we could find about the architects. We theorized about what galactic civilization might be like. We debated for centuries about how to present ourselves when this day came. Should we be humble? Aggressive? Defensive? What did you decide?" Kelrix asked. Captain Chen turned from the window. "We decided to be ourselves, honest about what we were, clear about what we've become, and ready to prove it. We're not asking for charity or pity. We're not apologizing for what the architects saw in us. We're showing you what 3,000 years of facing our own nature has taught us." The meeting continued for hours. The humans shared data about their civilization, their technology, their culture. They showed videos of Earth, of their cities and farms and wilderness preserves. They explained how they had rebuilt their world after centuries of environmental damage. They demonstrated their technology, showing innovations born from necessity rather than tradition. Kelrix found himself fascinated. These humans were intense in ways that made other species uncomfortable. They felt things deeply. They asked uncomfortable questions. They challenged assumptions. But beneath that intensity was something else. Wisdom earned through struggle, strength forged in isolation, purpose born from having no choice but to face themselves. As the meeting concluded, Chen made one final statement. "We want to join Galactic Society, Ambassador, not as charity cases or curiosities. As equals, we know we have much to learn, but we also have much to offer. 3,000 years of solving problems alone teaches you to think differently." On the shuttle back to the fleet, Kelrix sat in silence, thinking about what he had witnessed. The Concordat had expected primitives or ruins. Instead, they found a civilization that had done something remarkable. They had taken the worst parts of their nature and consciously, deliberately changed them. But would the Concordat Council see it that way? Or would they see only what the architects had feared? A species too intense, too unpredictable, too dangerous to integrate. The vote would determine humanity's future. Kelrix only hoped the Council could see past their fear to the potential these remarkable beings represented. The Concordat Council chamber buzzed with heated debate. Kelrix stood to the side, watching as representatives argued about Earth's petition to join Galactic Society. 3 weeks had passed since first contact, and opinions remained sharply divided. "They are precisely what the architects warned us about," Warlord Krathix thundered. The massive Cravor slammed his fist on his console, making the structure shake. "Their weapons are designed for one purpose, killing efficiently. Their entire culture celebrates combat and sacrifice. They are warriors wearing the mask of civilization. They are survivors," countered Dr. Yenna, her gentle voice somehow cutting through the noise. "They faced extinction and chose unity. They looked at their worst traits and consciously changed them. That shows moral courage we should admire, not fear." The debate continued for hours. Finally, High Chancellor Morix raised his hand for silence. The elderly statesman's species lived for centuries, and his weathered face carried the weight of decades of leadership. "A decision must be made," he announced. "But Earth presents a unique challenge. We cannot judge them solely on records or brief meetings. I propose a series of trials. Let humanity demonstrate what they claim to be. Technology, culture, and capability. If they pass, they earn membership. If they fail, we revisit the architect's original question." The vote was close, but the motion passed. Humanity would have its chance to prove itself. Captain Chen received the news on the Endurance's bridge. She read the official communication twice, then looked at her officers. "They want us to prove we're not monsters. Fine. Let's show them what humans can do." The first trial was technological assessment. A team of Concordat scientists arrived at Luna Base to evaluate human achievements. Dr. Vexler, a brilliant Therian researcher, led the team. He expected to find crude imitations of basic principles. What he found instead challenged his understanding of innovation. The humans showed him their quantum neural networks. Unlike traditional AI systems that processed information linearly, human computers used quantum entanglement to create processing webs that mimicked biological thought. They were less efficient than Concordat systems, but far more creative, capable of solving problems through intuitive leaps rather than pure calculation. "We couldn't copy your designs," explained Dr. Lisa Park, a human cybernetics expert. So we studied our own brains instead. We asked, what makes human thinking special? Then we built machines that think like us rather than like perfect calculators. Vexlar examined their bioengineering next. The Concordat had strict ethical rules about genetic modification and biological integration. Humans developing in isolation had no such restrictions. They had merged biology and technology in ways that made Vexlar's skin crawl and his scientific mind race with possibilities. This is remarkable, he admitted. Studying a human soldier with enhanced reflexes and integrated tactical systems. But why? Why modify yourselves? Because we had to, the soldier replied. His name was James Rodriguez, and he spoke with casual confidence. Space is dangerous. Our bodies weren't designed for it. So we helped ourselves adapt. Nothing we do is permanent or forced. It's all voluntary, all reversible. We just gave ourselves better tools to survive. The weapons demonstration was most controversial. Warlord Krathix himself attended, eager to confirm his suspicions about human violence. The humans took him to a testing range in the asteroid belt and showed him their arsenal. Kinetic cannons that could punch through ship armor, missile swarms that used quantum targeting, plasma weapons that humans had developed independently, using different principles than Concordat designs. Nuclear devices, chemical weapons, biological agents. Every tool of war humanity had created in 3,000 years of isolation. You see? Krathix said to the observers. They are weapons makers. This confirms everything. But Captain Chen wasn't finished. Now let me show you what we actually build. She took them to a different facility. Construction drones that could build orbital habitats in weeks. Terraforming equipment that had transformed Mars. Medical technology that could regrow organs and repair genetic damage. Environmental restoration systems that had cleaned Earth's polluted atmosphere and oceans. We know how to destroy, Chen said quietly. We also know how to create. The difference is we choose which tools to use and when. Yes, we have weapons. We'd be fools not to, but look at what we've actually done with 3,000 years. We built, we healed, we grew. The weapons exist for defense, not conquest. The cultural exchange was perhaps the most uncomfortable trial. Concordat citizens had lived in peace for millennia. Their art was beautiful but calm. Their music was mathematically perfect. Their literature explored philosophical concepts with detached intellectualism. Human culture was different. It was raw, emotional, intense. They brought paintings that depicted war and suffering alongside love and joy. They shared music that could make listeners feel intense emotions, from rage to sorrow to triumphant happiness. Their literature was filled with conflict, sacrifice, redemption, and loss. Ambassador Kelrix attended a human concert and found himself overwhelmed by the experience. The music wasn't perfect, but it made him feel things he had never felt before. The art wasn't pretty, but it was honest in ways that Concordat art never dared to be. The stories weren't comfortable, but they explored truths about choice and consequence that resonated deeply. Why is everything so intense? Asked Prisha, the young Velen translator. She had been reading human literature and found it exhausting. A human author named Maria Santos smiled sadly. Because life is intense. Love hurts. Loss changes you. Choosing right over wrong takes courage. We don't hide from these truths in our art. We explore them, study them, try to understand them. Our culture isn't about making people comfortable. It's about making them feel alive. The final trial was military capability. Warlord Krathix insisted on it, and the council agreed. A simulated battle. Human ships against Cravor tactical groups. The Cravor were the Concordat's finest warriors. With centuries of tradition and proven tactics, the battle took place in a designated zone, using simulated weapons that recorded hits without causing actual damage. 12 human ships faced 8 Cravor vessels. The Cravor were larger, more powerful, using proven Concordat technology. Every simulation the Concordat ran predicted an easy Cravor victory. The battle began, and immediately the humans surprised everyone. They didn't fight like any species the Concordat had encountered. They split into smaller groups, used the asteroids for cover, employed feints and false retreats. The Cravor destroyed 3 human ships in the first 10 minutes. Then something changed. The surviving human ships adapted their tactics mid-battle. They started using maneuvers the Cravor computers couldn't predict because they violated optimal efficiency calculations. They accepted risks that made Concordat observers gasp. One ship deliberately took damage to get a better firing angle. Another used its dying power core to create a sensor blind spot. The human commander, a woman named Admiral Zhang Wei, coordinated her forces with rapid, decisive orders. She never hesitated, never second-guessed. When she lost ships, she acknowledged the loss and immediately adjusted her strategy. There was no panic, no paralysis, just adaptation and determination. In the end, the humans lost 7 ships to the Cravors 3, but they achieved their objective, securing the designated zone. The Cravor withdrew, technically defeated despite inflicting heavier losses. Warlord Krathix was silent for a long moment after the battle ended. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying grudging respect. They fought like they had already accepted death. Every captain knew they might die, and none hesitated. They adapted faster than our computers could predict. They took risks that our warriors wouldn't dare. This is not how civilized species fight. No, agreed Admiral Vexith quietly. It's how survivors fight. Species that had to win or die. Every single time for 3,000 years. Kelrix compiled all the data from the trials into a comprehensive report. The humans had proven themselves technologically innovative, culturally rich if intense, and tactically creative if unorthodox. They had also revealed something the Concordat found deeply unsettling: humanity's willingness to accept cost that other species avoided. They modified their own bodies. They created art that made people uncomfortable. They fought battles knowing they would lose ships and crew. They didn't minimize risk or seek perfect safety. They accepted danger as part of existence and moved forward anyway. The question wasn't whether humans were capable. They clearly were. The question was whether the Concordat was ready for a species that lived with such intensity, that felt so deeply, that committed so completely to their choices. The council would vote in 1 week. Kelrix knew it would be close. He also knew that regardless of the outcome, humanity had already proven something important. They had proven the architects wrong, not by becoming less human, but by becoming the best version of what humanity could be. Now they just needed the galaxy to see it the same way. The emergency alert reached the Concordat Council at Oro 300 station time. High Chancellor Morix was pulled from sleep by his aide, who delivered the news with a trembling voice. The Devourers had launched their largest attack in a century, targeting the Yena system with a fleet of unprecedented size. The Devourers were machines, created by some long-dead species as weapons or tools, no one knew which. They had evolved beyond their original programming, becoming a hive-mind intelligence that consumed resources and replicated endlessly. For 500 years, the Concordat had contained them at the galaxy's edge, through constant vigilance and careful strategy. But containment was not victory, and the Devourers were patient. Morix studied the tactical display with growing horror. Yena Prime was an agricultural world, home to 12 million civilians. The Devourers had bypassed the outer defense stations using a route no one thought possible. They would reach the planet in 6 hours. The nearest Concordat fleet was 4 days away at maximum speed. 12 million people would die, and there was nothing anyone could do. What forces do we have in range? Morix asked, already knowing the answer. His tactical officer checked the display. Only one group, Chancellor. The human fleet. They're conducting maneuvers 2 systems away. They could reach Yena in 5 hours. The council chamber erupted into debate within minutes of the emergency session being called. The vote on Earth's membership was scheduled for 4 days from now. Using human military forces before that vote seemed premature at best, dangerous at worst. We cannot trust them with this, Krathix argued. What if they decide to show their true nature? What if they see this as an opportunity for conquest? 12 million Yena will die if we do nothing, countered Dr. Yena, her voice breaking with emotion. My people, Chancellor. My family lives on that world. Ambassador Kelrix stepped forward. This is exactly the test we needed. Not a simulation, but a real crisis. If humans help, we know they've truly changed. If they refuse or betray us, we have our answer about their nature. Either way, we learn the truth. The vote was close, but desperation won. They would contact the humans. Captain Chen was drilling her squadron in combat maneuvers when the message arrived. She read it twice, then called an immediate conference with her senior officers. On the holographic display, the tactical situation looked grim. They're asking us to intervene, her executive officer said, but they haven't accepted us yet. This could be a trap. It's a test, Chen replied. Maybe the only test that matters. They want to know if we'll fight to protect others, not just ourselves. Admiral Jiang Wei, commander of the entire human fleet in Concordat space, appeared on the comm channel. Captain Chen, I'm uploading full tactical data to all ships. This is not a drill. The Concordat has authorized our intervention, but warned us that any aggressive action beyond defense will result in our permanent exclusion. We save the Yena civilians, nothing more. Understood, Admiral. What are our rules of engagement? Standard rescue protocols. Protect the civilians, evacuate who we can, destroy Devourer forces as necessary. But Chen, the Concordat loses ships to the Devourers regularly. They're extremely dangerous. No one will blame us if we decide this is too risky. Chen looked at her crew. They had trained for combat their entire careers, but never faced real enemy fire. This would be their first true test against an opponent that wanted to kill them. She saw fear in some faces, determination in others. All looked back at her, waiting for her decision. With respect, Admiral, people will blame us if we let 12 million civilians die when we could have helped. The whole point of proving ourselves is to show we're not the monsters the architects thought we were. That means protecting the innocent even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Jiang Wei smiled slightly. I was hoping you'd say that. All ships jump to Yena system. We have work to do. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace to chaos. The Devourers had already reached Yena Prime's orbital space. Their ships were unlike any biological designs. Perfect spheres and geometric shapes, all purpose and no aesthetics. They moved with mechanical precision, descending on the planet's population centers like a swarm of metal insects. Scanning, Chen's tactical officer reported. 300 Devourer vessels, ranging from fighter size to cruiser class. They're deploying ground forces to the major cities. Civilian casualties already in the thousands and climbing. Chen studied the tactical situation. The human fleet had 42 ships against 300. Bad odds made worse by the Devourers' advantages. No fear, no hesitation, perfect coordination through their hive mind. They didn't make mistakes, didn't panic, didn't break formation. But humans had advantages too. They were unpredictable. They could adapt. And they were very, very motivated. All ships, this is Chen. We can't fight them ship to ship and win. We need to disrupt their coordination and buy time for evacuations. Prisha, I'm sending you tactical suggestions. Be creative, be crazy, and don't worry about your paint job. The battle began not with elegant formations, but with chaos. Human ships dove into the Devourer fleet like hornets, breaking up their perfect patterns, forcing them to react instead of execute their program. One human frigate deliberately rammed a Devourer cruiser, both ships tumbling out of formation. Another used its fusion drive as a weapon, the superheated exhaust melting two smaller Devourer craft. On the ground, human Marines deployed in drop pods, landing directly in contested cities. Their mission wasn't to hold territory, but to buy time for civilian evacuations. Sergeant Marcus Hayes led his platoon into a commercial district where Devourer ground units were systematically processing civilians. The machines were efficient killers, but they followed patterns. Hayes had studied the Concordat's records of Devourer tactics extensively. He knew their weak points, their response patterns, their decision trees. He also knew something the machines didn't. Humans didn't always follow logic. Split into fire teams, Hayes ordered. Use the buildings for cover. Make them work for every meter. Don't try to win, just slow them down. The fighting was brutal. Devourer units didn't feel pain, didn't retreat, didn't surrender. But Hayes's Marines had trained for exactly this kind of desperate combat. They used explosives to collapse buildings onto machine formations. They set traps that exploited Devourer predictability. They fought room to room, floor to floor, buying minutes with blood. Above the planet, Captain Chen watched her ships dying. The Endurance had taken heavy damage, its shields failing under sustained fire. Around her, 7 human vessels had been destroyed, their crews lost. But they had disrupted the Devourer attack enough for transport ships to begin evacuating civilians from the surface. Casualties, she asked quietly. 3,000 dead or wounded, her executive officer reported. But we've evacuated 400,000 civilians so far. The Concordat transports are loading as fast as they can. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Millions remained on the surface, trapped in cities under attack. The human fleet was dying by inches, and once they were gone, the Devourers would complete their harvest unopposed. Then Commander Marcus Cole, captain of the damaged frigate Determination, sent a message to Chen. His ship had lost engines, shields, and weapons. It was dead in space, slowly being pulled toward the planet's gravity well by physics and damage. "Captain Chen, I have an idea. It's crazy, but everything about today is crazy." Chen listened to his plan, her blood running cold. "Marcus, you'd be killed. Your entire crew." "My crew is already evacuated to escape pods, Captain. I sent them away 10 minutes ago. I'm alone here, and the determination is still falling. The Devourers have a command node coordinating their fleet. It's that big sphere at the center of their formation. If I can hit it, I can disrupt their coordination long enough for you to finish evacuations. It's a suicide run. It's a calculated sacrifice, ma'am. There's a difference. I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing it. And I know it matters." Chen looked at the tactical display. Cole was right. A ship hitting that command node at the right angle and speed could create a cascade failure in the Devourer network. They'd recover eventually, but those precious minutes could save millions. She thought about the Concordat watching this battle, judging humanity by what they saw. She thought about the architects who had locked Earth away because humans were too violent, too intense, too willing to fight. "Do it," she said quietly. "Godspeed, Commander Cole." The Determination's fall became controlled flight as Cole manually adjusted the trajectory using emergency thrusters. The Devourers recognized the threat too late. Their weapons fire tore into the frigate, but Cole had already committed. The ship hit the command node at 1,200 meters per second. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface. The Devourer fleet paused, their perfect coordination disrupted by the destruction of their central intelligence. It was only a moment, maybe 30 seconds before they adapted, but 30 seconds was enough. Human ships pushed their engines beyond safe limits, scooping up transports filled with civilians and jumping to hyperspace. The Marines on the ground fought their way to extraction points, leaving behind defensive positions that would collapse within minutes, but buying just enough time for the last evacuations. The footage from Jena Prime spread across the Concordat like wildfire. Every news network, every public display, every personal device showed the same images. Human ships diving into impossible odds, Marines fighting room to room against mechanical horrors. Commander Cole's final transmission before his ship struck the Devourer command node. "Some things are worth dying for. Today we choose what kind of species we are." Public opinion shifted overnight. The species that had been debated as potentially dangerous were now being called heroes. The intensity that had frightened Concordat citizens was now seen as courage. The willingness to accept casualties that seemed reckless was now understood as sacrifice. In the Jena refugee camps, 4 million survivors told their stories. They spoke of human soldiers who had stayed behind to buy time for evacuations, of ships that had fought far past the point when retreat would have been reasonable, of strangers from a species no one had known existed 3 months ago, who had died so that Jena civilians could live. Dr. Jena addressed the council 3 days after the battle, her voice steady, but her eyes red from crying. "My daughter was in the capital city when the Devourers attacked. She sent me a message saying goodbye, certain she would die. Then humans fell from the sky. Marines in armor fought through the streets to reach the evacuation points. My daughter lived because a human sergeant whose name she never learned held a position for 20 minutes before reinforcements arrived. He died doing it. I will never forget his sacrifice." The council chamber was silent. Even Warlord Krathix, who had opposed humanity's admission so fiercely, said nothing. He had reviewed the tactical data extensively, analyzing every human decision. Their tactics were unorthodox, their losses heavy, their methods sometimes brutal. But their objective had never wavered: protect the innocent, no matter the cost. Ambassador Kelrick stood to present the final assessment. He had spent weeks compiling data, interviewing survivors, and analyzing humanity's actions. The report was comprehensive, but the conclusion was simple. The architects sealed Earth because they feared humanity's violence and intensity. Kelrick's began. They were right to see these traits. What they couldn't predict was how humanity would choose to use them. In 3,000 years of isolation, humans had countless opportunities to destroy themselves. Instead, they chose to evolve, not by becoming less human, but by channeling their nature toward protection rather than conquest. He displayed footage from the battle, showing the moment Commander Cole's ship struck the command node. This is what the architects feared, a species willing to die for their beliefs. But look at what Cole believed in: saving strangers, protecting the innocent, giving others a chance to live even at the cost of his own life. This is not the violence of monsters. This is the courage of protectors, the vote was called. One by one, the council representatives indicated their choice. The Velen voted yes. The Yenna voted yes with tears streaming down their faces. The Therian voted yes. Even the cautious species who had worried about human unpredictability voted yes. Finally, Warlord Krathix rose. The chamber fell silent, waiting for his vote. Everyone knew he had been humanity's strongest opponent. "I have studied warfare for 300 years," Krathix said slowly. "I have fought in 100 battles, commanded fleets, trained warriors. I know what combat requires. I know what separates survivors from casualties. The humans fought at Yenna Prime like no species I have ever encountered. They accepted losses that would break other civilizations. They adapted faster than should be possible. They never hesitated, never faltered, never considered retreat." He paused, and for a moment Kelrix thought the Cravor would vote against admission. Then Krathix continued. "They also never forgot why they were fighting. Every human action, every sacrifice, every decision was made to protect Yenna civilians. They could have withdrawn when losses mounted. No one would have blamed them. Instead, they stayed and bled so that strangers might live. This is not violence for its own sake. This is strength used righteously. The Concordat needs such strength, whether we are comfortable admitting it or not. I vote yes." The final tally was unanimous. Earth was admitted to the Concordat, but not as a junior member or probationary addition. The Council created a new designation specifically for humanity: Guardian Species. Earth would be given responsibility for defending the Concordat's most dangerous borders. It was recognition and caution combined, an acknowledgement that humanity's warrior nature, properly channeled, was exactly what the galaxy needed. The signing ceremony took place on Earth, the first time any Concordat officials had visited the human homeworld. Kelric stood on a platform overlooking a city called Beijing, watching billions of humans celebrate on screens across the planet. The sky was blue, the air was clean, and everywhere he looked, he saw life recovering from ancient wounds. "Your world is beautiful," he told Captain Chen, who stood beside him in formal uniform. "It wasn't always," she replied. "We nearly destroyed it a dozen times. Pollution, war, environmental collapse. Every generation faced a choice: keep destroying or start healing. Eventually, enough people chose healing. That's what impresses me most," Kelrix admitted. "Not your technology or your tactics, but your choices. You had every reason to become the monsters the architects feared. Instead, you became protectors." Chen smiled sadly. "We became protectors because we knew what it was like to need protection. Earth's history is full of people who made terrible choices. It's also full of people who chose differently, who sacrificed for others, who stood between the innocent and those who would harm them. We learned from both. We remembered the victims and honored them by becoming the shield they needed." The signing ceremony was brief but meaningful. High Chancellor Morix presented Earth with full membership credentials and the Guardian designation. Captain Chen signed on behalf of humanity, her hand steady despite the weight of the moment. Then came the memorial. In Earth's orbit, human ships had constructed a monument from the wreckage of the vessels lost at Yenna Prime. Commander Cole's name was there, along with the 7,000 others who had died. The Yenna had insisted on contributing, adding their own memorial stones carved with messages of gratitude. Kelrix attended the dedication ceremony with thousands of others, human and alien alike. A young human officer read the names of the fallen, each one echoing across the speakers. It took hours, but no one left. Everyone stayed to hear every name, to honor every sacrifice. When it was finished, Admiral Jiang Wei spoke. "These people died far from home, fighting for strangers from a species most had never met. They didn't die because they were ordered to, or because they sought glory. They died because they chose to. Because when faced with the choice between safety and sacrifice, between self-interest and service, they chose to be humanity's best selves. Their deaths purchased 4 million lives. We honor them by living up to that example." The ceremony ended with a human tradition, a moment of silence. For 60 seconds, billions of beings across dozens of worlds stopped and remembered. Kelrix found himself thinking not just about the fallen, but about what their sacrifice represented. The architects had tried to predict humanity's future and failed. They couldn't imagine that violence and intensity, channeled through conscious choice, could become the foundation of heroism. Later, Kelrix stood with Chen on a transport shuttle. preparing to depart for the joint human concordate fleet being assembled. Earth had committed 20% of its military to the Guardian fleet, ships and crew that would defend the galaxy's borders against threats like the Devourers. "Are you ready for this?" Kelrix asked. "The borders are dangerous. You'll face constant combat, heavy losses, missions that seem impossible." Chen looked out at Earth, watching it recede as the shuttle climbed toward orbit. "We've been preparing for 3,000 years, Ambassador. Every generation wondering what would happen when the barrier fell. We built ships, trained soldiers, developed technology, all while hoping we'd never need any of it, hoping we'd be accepted peacefully. But you were also ready to fight if necessary. We were ready to prove ourselves however we needed to. The architects judged us on what we were. We wanted the galaxy to judge us on what we chose to become. At Yenna Prime, we made that choice visible. We chose to be protectors even though it cost us dearly." The shuttle docked with the Endurance, which had been repaired and upgraded with concordate technology as a sign of partnership. Chen's crew was ready, a mixture of human intensity and hard-won wisdom. They knew the dangers ahead. They knew some of them wouldn't return from every mission, but they also knew their purpose. As the Guardian fleet assembled, ships from Earth joining vessels from across the concordate, Kelrix felt something he hadn't experienced in his long career: hope. Not the cautious hope of diplomacy or the calculated hope of politics, but genuine hope born from witnessing courage. The architects had sealed Earth to protect the galaxy from humanity. They couldn't have known that isolation would forge humanity into exactly what the galaxy needed. Not conquerors or destroyers, but warriors who fought not for themselves but for others. Protectors who understood the cost of violence because they had paid it so many times before.